All right, so we're diving into this podcast episode on daily habits that you shared, and I got to say, at first I was a little like, okay, another productivity hack, you know?
Yeah, I hear you on that. It's easy to be skeptical, but what I found really interesting about this one wasn't so much the quantity of habits they talked about, but the why. Like why these successful people actually swear by these specific things.
Okay, yeah, the why is always interesting. So where did it really hook you? What stood out?
The morning routine stuff, for sure. And before you're like, ugh, not that, again, it's not about waking up at the crack of dawn to run a marathon or whatever. It's more about those small intentional things you do to kind of set the tone for the day.
So we're not just chugging coffee and hoping for the best.
Not quite. No, they actually had I think it was a really clever analogy. They were talking about a successful morning routine being like building a house. And like you always start with a strong foundation, right?
Right.
Those first couple hours, even if it's just 30 minutes of doing something focused, it becomes this bedrock.
I can see that. There's that feeling, like even if you only get one small thing done early, you're like, all right, I did something. And it kind of snowballs into the rest of your day. You feel like, okay, I'm in control. I can keep this going.
Exactly. And that sense of control, that feeling of being proactive, it actually ties right into another habit they talked about, which is intentional living. They even had this analogy of a map for your day, which I thought was interesting.
Okay, I love a good visual.
Mhm.
So walk me through this map analogy. How does that actually look in real life?
So you wouldn't get in your car and drive across the country without some kind of plan, right? You got to have a route.
Right.
Intentional living, it's kind of like bringing that same level of planning and purpose to your everyday life. It's about knowing, like, okay, what do I want to achieve? Those goals you have, both big and small, and then actually structuring your day in a way that supports that.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's be real. Things happen, you know?
Yeah.
Like you've got those surprise meetings popping up, deadlines change, you spill your coffee on your keyboard. How do you stay intentional when it feels like everything's chaos?
Well, that's where that whole map idea, I think, is helpful. It's not about, sticking to some rigid minute by minute schedule, but it's about having a sense of direction, right? It's about knowing these are my priorities and then making conscious choices about how you spend your time and energy, even when things get a little derailed.
So it's more like adapting your route, not necessarily sticking to that one fixed path.
Mm.
I like that. It kind of makes me think about another point that they made in this episode, which was about prioritizing your health.
Oh, absolutely. Because you can't expect to be operating at your best, to
Correct.
learn and grow and actually achieve those big goals if you're totally running on fumes.
It's weird, right? We get so caught up in the doing that we forget about just being and like actually taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, totally. And they made that point really clear in this episode. I think they even cited a study. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something about how our brains just like totally tank when we're even a little dehydrated.
Whoa, seriously. Now I'm suddenly thinking about how much water I haven't had today. But yeah, I get it. If we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't expect to use any of these strategies we're talking about.
Exactly. It's all connected. And this actually leads perfectly to their point on continuous learning, which, I mean, you obviously get this because you shared this episode. You're someone who values learning new stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Always hunting for those aha moments.
And that's the thing, right? Knowledge without action, it's kind of pointless. It's like having a map but never actually going anywhere. They really emphasized how it's not enough to just listen to stuff. You got to actively look for what speaks to you, what challenges you, and then figure out how to actually use it.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? Because I'll be honest, I feel like I'm drowning in podcasts and articles and books all the time.
Yeah.
It's easy to just get overwhelmed and never put any of it into practice.
Yeah.
Do they have any tips?
Oh, yeah, totally. They had this thing they called active reflection. Basically, it's about just hitting pause every so often, like at the end of the day or the week, and asking yourself, what I learned, what really stuck with me, and the most important part, how can I actually use it?
So simple, but it's like, wow, why don't I do that more? We're always in such a rush to get to the next thing. We don't even process the information.
Yeah, it's like that saying, we eat to live, not live to eat. We learn to grow, not just to know a bunch of random stuff.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me think about how easy it is to get discouraged when things don't go perfectly, you know? But this episode, they talked about how setbacks are just part of the process.
Yeah, it's so easy to be like, well, I tried, it didn't work. I guess this just isn't for me. It happens to everyone. But this episode had a really cool take on this. They were saying, like, Instead of looking at setbacks as failures, we should think of them as feedback.
Oh, interesting.
Like, we all know that saying, you learn more from your mistakes than your successes.
Totally. But I guess it's not enough to just like bounce back. You have to actually learn something from it, right?
Yeah.
Did they have any tips on how to do that?
So they had this whole section on resilience, which they defined as basically being able to adapt and adjust when things go sideways. And one of the things they mentioned, they told the story about this entrepreneur. He actually kept what he called a failure journal. He'd write down all his setbacks and then really break them down, figure out what went wrong, and like brainstorm how he could do it differently next time.
I kind of love that idea. It takes all the sting out of messing up, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, this is just research for next time.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're expecting those bumps in the road and figuring out how to swerve around them before you even hit them.
Exactly. And that kind of proactive mindset, it seems to be a theme with a lot of these habits we've been talking about, right? Whether it's being intentional with your morning or reflecting on what you're learning, it's all about taking charge instead of just letting life happen to you.
I like that, yeah. It's empowering when you think about it that way. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, is there one big takeaway that really stuck with you from this episode?
For me, it comes down to those small, consistent actions. You don't have to change your whole life overnight. Just pick one habit, one small change you want to make, and actually stick to it. Let that little win build some momentum.
I love that. Small
Mhm.
steps, big changes. Well, thanks so much for walking through all of this with me. I feel like I've got a whole new outlook on this stuff now.
Anytime, it's been fun.
And the real question is, what habit are you committing to today?